Hello, everyone. I am Natasha Ryan, and this is the North Group's podcast, Time to Head North. I am their VP of Communications, former news anchor, which is why I host this podcast to get information out there, have great conversations with folks in our sector, the security industry. And today I'm delighted to have Michael Hill with me. Michael, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Well, it's snowy still in the Pacific Northwest at the time of this.
Same here in Minnesota.
Minnesota gets way more snow than us, but
I think it's -13 right now.
Woo.
It feels like -31.
Oh, I can't even. I'm not good in that kind of weather. I don't do well. Okay, I want you to give a little bit of background, please, for our listeners. Tell us what you got into back in the day and what you're up to now.
Yeah, so I joined the Army in 2004. I was in a long-range reconnaissance unit and ended up going active duty as an infantryman in 2006 and was in 1st Cavalry Division and went to Iraq a couple times. Completed my service, and then I went into the private sector. Doing anything from high threat protection all the way to executive protection to running a private island to traveling the world. And most recently, I joined up with some buddies and we went to Ukraine. And we were in Ukraine for about 6.5, 7 months. Doing all kinds of different stuff, which I'm sure you want to talk about.
That is what I want to talk about. That is definitely what I want to talk about, Michael. So, and looking at your, resume, LinkedIn background, I mean, you really have done it all. I mean, it's impressive how many companies you've worked for, how many things you're a part of, your flags for a veteran foundation. I mean, all of it is fantastic. Thank you for your service, first and foremost.
I appreciate it.
Yep. So let's get into the current. First of all, when people say, what is Ukraine like? How would you describe it? Had you been there prior to going over there to do what we're about to talk about? Or
I had not, no.
Okay. So you didn't see the before package of Ukraine. How would you you did 2 tours to Iraq. How would you describe the state of Ukraine right now?
It's beautiful. Ukraine is, I think, the second largest country in Europe. And a lot of people think, they're at war and it's right there up in your face. To get to Ukraine, you can't fly directly there. You have to go to Poland and then make your way across. And, to go all the way to the east to the front, it takes anywhere from 16 to 18 hours. Ukraine's a beautiful place. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. It was very green, a lot of farmlands, a lot of sunflowers. It's just absolutely beautiful. The Ukrainian people are absolutely amazing. Some of the most patriotic people I've ever met in my life. Very humble and very, how would you say, very, very appreciative to have people there to help them.
That's great. And that's good to paint that picture, right? It's not just a walking war zone everywhere you go in Ukraine,
right?
But specifically areas that were. What were you doing in those areas? Let's just go ahead and jump into it. Why were you over there?
So initially, some buddies and I joined together and went to help with another buddy's family who actually lived in Kyiv when the invasion kicked off in February of last year. Initially, we went in to do extractions and get people out of harm's way as the Russians were closing in on Kyiv. Through that, we developed a relationship with some individuals inside of the government and the Ukrainian government, and did some intel collection for them. Also helped with some extractions of their family and stuff. And that led into us being invited to train some of their special operations, some of their specialty units that they were using for special missions.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that for, I don't know, a couple months. And then we actually started embedding with these units and running operations with them. And eventually went all in and became a Ukrainian special operations operator.
So, what was it like being an American embedded in the Ukrainian special forces groups?
Um, it was a reality check, because the type of warfare that's going on over there it's not like Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, it's a conventional war against a conventional army, and I think the best way to describe it is it's like 100 years of warfare rolled into one. I mean, you've got trenches, you've got artillery, tanks, landmines, force on force infantry. I mean, it was crazy.
Were you, do you think it was, for lack of a better word, scarier being in Ukraine in those moments or back in Iraq?
I'd definitely say Ukraine. The intensity was way more than what I experienced in Iraq. Um, the other side was that we didn't have the support and logistics like we had in Iraq or like we have in the American military. Medevac and casualty care is nowhere near what it would be like in Iraq or Afghanistan. You're not calling a helicopter to come get you, and you know you may make it to the hospital in an hour or so, but it's you got to get out on foot, and then you get to a car, and then the car takes you to the hospital. So we relied heavily on our medics, our field medicine, um, the supply chain. I mean, it's nowhere near what we had in the American military. I mean, again, the Ukrainian military, there's a lot of awesome people, but they're not as equipped as the American military. So you deal with issues such as the logistical problems and not having the equipment, not having the supply chain, not having the medevac stuff. So it was a lot more challenging.
I would imagine that not knowing where the next thing you need or when it's going to come, if it's going to come, and then there's no one to call to rescue you is um, quite terrifying in moments. I
Yeah,
guess.
and on top of it, I mean, the world hasn't seen this kind of warfare since World War II,
Mhm.
and the amount of artillery and tanks, just it you were going up against a lot of stuff that we haven't seen since World War II.
Were you trained and ready for any of this, or was this all kind of learn as you go?
Um, you know, Back when I was a young soldier, they taught us the basics, and it really the basics like hand and arm signals or just planning
Yeah.
operations and stuff like that. I mean, just those that was used more in this. And I can't say that. No, I don't think that I was fully prepared and trained for what I went into. But the basics that I was taught um, somewhat prepared me. Um, it's it went back to more of a primitive style
Yeah.
of being an infantryman because on top of all the tanks, artillery, and all that stuff, you're dealing with electronic warfare, and they're jamming systems, they're jamming your radios. So I mean, honestly, like using hand arm signals was really all we had. I mean, we're very spoiled in the U.S. military because we have all the best equipment in the world, you know. But you remove that equipment and you still got to be able to operate, and that's what we did.
So I went to the premiere of a documentary on the conflict years ago, where the streets of Ukraine were filled with citizens that held their ground, and for months in bitter cold temperatures, they did not relent. And I remember thinking in that moment, I don't know if Americans would do that. I don't know if they would stand or would they go home, or would they stand in the streets in the freezing cold? And I started to question, the different levels of patriotism. And I just wonder, I mean, do you think it's primitive? That's what I'm envisioning, right? Is how you're describing this is an exact word for this. Do you think the younger American soldiers could handle this type of warfare if we had to go and do this?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you take a look back at 9/11 and how the country came together, and how we fought 2 wars. We have one of the greatest militaries in the world. I absolutely think that if the time came and if it happened, that we would adapt. Would there be some learning moments? Of course.
Yeah.
And as far as Americans taken to the streets, I mean, if our country was invaded, I absolutely believe that everybody would stand up to defend our country. We live in the greatest country in the world. And the Ukrainians are a lot like the Americans, and have a lot of the same values. So, I mean, that's largely why I've supported them as much as I have.
I feel that emotional parallel when I talk to my Ukrainian friends. Like I hear you and what you're saying. I guess the obvious question is, you don't have to embed. You're not a part of their country and their army officially. What drives you to fight side by side with their soldiers?
Freedom. Um, you know, we're very fortunate here in the United States to have the freedoms that we do. Um, you know, Obviously our country has been at odds, and it's divided, and we've had our political issues and social justice issues and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, we still live in the greatest country in the world. As far as being drawn to help in Ukraine, like I said, one, freedom. Two, what the Russians are doing is wrong. I've seen the atrocities that they've committed. It's You take a look at a kid that has lost everything, lost their parents. It's a refugee now and has no idea where they're going, and has no idea what's going on in the world. And somebody's got to stand for that. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm capable enough and have the skills to be of assistance, and it's my duty to do that.
And you being over there, are you ever worried that you won't come home to your family, friends over here?
Every day. You know, I went over initially planning on staying a month and helping with the refugees, and and I ended up going down the rabbit hole and staying for 6.5, 7 months. And as it got more intense, there was quite a few times that I didn't think I was making it back. And oddly enough, I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm packing up to head back over. And I was going through some of my bags and stuff last night, and a piece of shrapnel that was embedded in a tree that went in right above my head. I had it sitting here. So, yeah, I mean,
Tell that story. I've heard it at IPSB, but tell the story about the shrapnel.
So we we retook a village, um, and during that, we assaulted the village and everything, and um, we had some adjacent units that were supporting us that were going to reinforce us. Well, our we were the main effort. Went in, we took the village. Um, at some point, the other units started taking casualties, so they pulled out and they left us in the village. So all the artillery and everything turned on us. We had the Russians come in and probe um, our unit on the northern side, or actually the southeastern side, excuse me. They returned fire, and then we had a drone come in, and as we were running across the road and through I guess there was a house, and it was a piece of property or whatever. It was an open area. Um, they started to turn all that stuff on us, and so some of the guys were able to get up underneath a lean-to and take cover so the drone couldn't see them. I unfortunately got caught underneath a tree, and they started walking the rounds in on us. And the last one that hit, that's where that shrapnel came from. It hit really, really close, and that that piece of shrapnel fell down right in front of me or whatever. And I picked it up, and there was a house probably about 15 meters from where I was at. So at this point, I felt like the next one was probably going to be way too close.
Yeah.
So I actually just grabbed that piece of shrapnel and threw it in my pocket, and then I jumped up and ran, and jumped through a window into the house. Got into the house, and was hoping to go down to a basement, but I think I picked the only house in that village that didn't have a basement. So, as I went through the house, I found it was like a pantry. It had cement walls, and so I got in there and laid down and piled a bunch of stuff on top of me and just waited. And I think it went on for about 4 or 5 hours. They hit us consistently. I don't know that they actually saw me get up and run and jump into the house, which, I mean, I think if they did, they would have hit the house, but they hit all around the house. They never hit the house.
Why do you think that is? They didn't just hit the house too.
I don't know. I have no idea. I guess the man upstairs was looking out for me.
I was going to say, wasn't there a component where you believe faith intervened? Didn't you see something in the house?
Yeah. So when they finally stopped and we were able to pull back and regroup, on the way out the door, there was a little picture of Jesus. And actually, I think I've got it. I do have it.
Good. I want to see that. I mean, this is like a plot in a movie,
I know, right?
Intervention, seriously.
So yeah, here it is. This was over the top of the door.
Oh, wow.
And so on my way out, I saw it and I reached up and I grabbed it and took it with me because, I definitely felt like somebody was looking out for me and was taking care of me. But so we regrouped and we actually ended up having to pull out of the village because they turned everything on it and just started leveling it. So we didn't have any support and no reinforcements. So we made the call and pulled back. And then
were there civilians still in that village? Or had
there were not many. And we think the ones that were there, we're not actually 100% sure that they were from there or whether they were Russians dressed in civilian clothes.
Okay.
The ones that we ran into, it's kind of odd that when we ran into them shortly after that, they started hitting us with artillery again.
Yeah.
So, there's no way to 100% tell, but didn't see any women or children. So
in those moments where you have to decide, actually, I want to pause that because I want to come back to the component of faith. When you're in these life and death situations and you are thinking, this may be it for me. What does it mean? You know, you took the shrapnel, you took the picture of Jesus. How do those things that you take with you help you in those moments of trauma or crisis?
You know, the shrapnel, I don't know, like that was just like, I don't know. It was like sorry, my computer is doing something.
No, you're fine.
You know, with the shrapnel, that was more of like a souvenir. It's like, well, that was pretty damn close, you know. So with that one, like I grabbed it.
Part of a story to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I literally I was shook to my core. Like that, I really thought that was the day. You know, I didn't think I was coming back after that one. Yeah, that last round hit and the shrapnel went in to the tree or whatever, or hit the tree. I mean, I can remember laying there on the ground and tucking. And the bad thing is you can hear them coming. And as it's coming up, I remember I just tensed up, put my head in the dirt. And I mean, I didn't have any cover or anything. The only thing I had was the tree trunk, and that wasn't much. But I can remember asking, you know, praying to God, just saying, hey, you know, I didn't say goodbye to my family. At least let me say goodbye one more time. You know, my girlfriend at the time, you know, just everything kind of rushes in a brief second, and it's like your life flashes before your eyes. So I forgot what the question was now.
No, you're fine. You've got me in tears over here. So when you're in when you're in the house, why take the picture of Jesus with you? How does it help you?
Yeah. So when I left, I mean, you know, the part that I did leave out, you know, I said, you know, went on for 4 or 5 hours. I was absolutely exhausted. And at that point, that was kind of the first time I had a chance to rest. I mean, I've been running from house to house. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Your body needed rest.
So I actually fell asleep while I was in there. And, you know, I slept. I have no idea how long I slept, but I remember, you know, I came to because I heard somebody coming in the door, and there again, like I had no idea who it was. And you know, I've got my rifle trained to the door, and you know, I hear somebody in English say, "Hey, Mike, you all right?" And you know, that was, you know, I'm a very tense moment, and you know, let out my breath, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And you know, get up, and you know, it was one of my other buddies that was out there with me. But we go out and we go in. It was like a little, I guess you call it like a foyer or whatever.
Yeah.
Or a mud room. And you know, we're kind of talking about a plan on where we're headed and what we're going to do and all that stuff. And you know, I looked up and I saw that, and you know, I looked around to where all these rounds had impacted. And, you know, I mean, I couldn't think, but there's nothing I could think, but, you know, somebody was protecting me. And
Yeah.
I felt like that was just a way of him showing us or showing me that he was there.
Yeah.
And, you know, taking it, you know, that house was completely destroyed. It's not like,
They're not returning, right?
nah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was meant for me to see, you know, and,
Yeah.
you know, I took it and I put it in my pocket and I carried it on my shoulder for the rest of the time I was in Ukraine. But I just felt like it was a sign. It was meant for me to see.
Yeah. No doubt. 100% agree. Glad you had that. Glad you had that protection with you. Going back to something you said you didn't know if they were civilians or Russians dressed as civilians. You know, to outsiders that don't have the military or service experience, explain what that's like to, you know, how do you weed through the deception? I mean, how do you know the person you're going to help actually needs your help and doesn't have a gun under it and is going to shoot you and they're a faux civilian?
Yeah, it's very challenging. That's something that the U.S. military has dealt with um, a lot over the past 20 years with
Right.
Iraq and Afghanistan. Is
Yep.
the civilians on the battlefield and combatants dressed in plain clothes and blending in. Um, obviously you take your precautions, but we didn't go into that village just to kill everything.
Yeah.
We went into the village to take it back. So obviously, there was uh, protocols and things that we followed when we came into contact with civilians on the battlefield that we would have to follow to make sure that they don't have any weapons or they're not strapped to blow up, which suicide bombing and all that stuff hasn't been really a big issue in my experience over there. So we're not dealing with the suicide vest and all
Right.
that stuff like we did in
Right.
Iraq and Afghanistan. But I mean, you pretty much, make sure they're clear and then you send them in a safe direction and, just hope that they aren't. If you don't have a way to prove it, then,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not like we could just take, tie them up or whatever and hang on to them because we had no idea and we didn't have the time to go through and figure out whether they were civilians or not. And, typically in some other incidences, we would clear them and then send them to a checkpoint where they would be further investigated. But in that instance, we didn't, just because of the speed that we were moving at.
You're about to go back over there. We'll get into that mission of what you're doing. Are you afraid to go back over?
But, there's always a level of fear that when you go into something like this that is going to scare you, or you won't come back home, but
Yeah.
if I wasn't scared, I'd be a little bit more concerned. I'm leaving after Christmas, and I was fortunate enough to get to spend some time with my family and stuff before the holidays, and but with the current climate, political climate and the physical climate, both are a little scary because President Biden and President Zelensky met yesterday, and the U.S. is vowed to supply more weapons and
The missile system.
yeah, the Patriot missile system and more money, more support and all this. And Russia has said that if we were to do that, then they're going to escalate. Which, I mean, I foresee they probably are going to escalate. Right now, they've been using the cold weather as a weapon and taking out the power grid and taking out heat sources and stuff like that. So it's pretty much just been trying to freeze out the Ukrainians. And I mean, they've taken some heavy losses during the fall or the end of the summer and into the fall and now into the winter. We've taken back Kherson, Kharkiv. There's a lot of stuff going on down in the Donbass right now. And the Russians are, I feel, regrouping and could possibly be doing a counterattack in the next few months. If not, they'll wait till the spring. But I definitely think we'll see some retaliation due to the meeting yesterday. So in the back of my head, I'm a little bit nervous about this trip. I don't plan to stay as long this time, and my role this time is more of a humanitarian role.
Yeah. What are you doing over there?
So I've partnered with a nonprofit called Letters of Hope for Ukraine. I'd met them, and they helped with some transportation and some other stuff while I was there the first time. and they are going over to spread Christmas cheer, taking donations and clothes and power banks and generators and all kinds of stuff. And we're going to go to different areas and distribute that stuff, and try and make some of these people's Christmas a little bit better than what it would be. I think I'm gonna be playing Old Saint Nick on this trip.
I love that.
So,
we need to spray paint your beard white. That's all.
yeah, there's a few of them in there.
Well, going there on the humanitarian side, how does that change your perception of what it's going to look like for you this time around?
I feel like it's going to reinforce the why on why I did what I did before, and why I will continue to support moving forward. I only plan on staying a month. But if something were to happen, then I obviously would probably stay longer.
I was going to say famous last words. I'll check in on you in a month and see.
Yeah. I really want to stick to that, but the need, I mean, there's just so much that needs to be done and that can be done. And it's once you're there and you're in it, it's hard to, time flies because, you're running 90 miles an hour every day and you're going through all this stuff, and, it's time flies by quick, and, it's hard to pull back once you're there because you keep seeing the needs and you keep wanting to help. Which is, obviously why I'm returning.
Do you think that want to help and the desire to fight for freedom, do you think that's something that is inherent in a person, or do you think that can be learned?
That's a tough question. I think, obviously it's not something that's inherent because not everybody knows what freedom is. So I think it is something that's learned. For me, service to others has been a big part of my life, especially when I got out of the military. I got into doing disaster relief, volunteering for disaster relief, and just being able to help people that they'll never know your name, or may never even see you again, but to be there in their moment of need, in their worst times, and to be able to help them and show them that there is hope in the world, that they're not alone. To me, is one of the most gratifying things in the world. It's service to others is just, I mean, it's not something that's natural. I think it's something that's taught, and it's not for everybody. But I think when it comes down to it, people are going to do what they need to do in their time of need.
I always feel this pull to, in situations like this, how can I help? How can I contribute, to helping people in these horrific situations? Like when I lay my head down and I pray for my own kids, I think about the kids in war zones, and I'm like, I mean, how as a mom could I even begin to help in those situations? And I know that it's, there's some areas I literally can do nothing other than pray. But for Americans listening to this, you've been over there, you've seen the needs. What can just the average American civilian do if they wanted to help out?
So, I mean, one thing is being aware, is spreading the word and you know supporting these people just by passing on their stories. Um, you know, the other thing is monetary contributions. You know, there's a lot of people that are volunteering their time. There's a lot of organizations that are volunteering, taking donations. When I originally started out, a lot of my trip was, or still is, self-funded. I started a GoFundMe, and I'm actually in the process of taking that GoFundMe and creating a nonprofit, that would move forward. Moving forward would not only just pertain to Ukraine, but any kind of natural disaster or conflict or anything of that nature. It would work towards the humanitarian side, um, of the house. So obviously, I mean, monetary donations to organizations. Mine has been called. I've been calling it Operation Hold Fast. We've got an Instagram. We've got the GoFundMe. I'm working on getting all the social media stuff together because
Great.
it's not my forte. But not just mine though. But I mean, there's tons of organizations, and all I'll say about that is that if you are going to make monetary contributions, take a look into these organizations and make sure that you're donating to a good cause, and this money is going to that cause, because there's a lot of organizations that they're taking this as an opportunity to make money.
Right.
You know,
Make
they're
sure
not
it's legit. Yeah.
exactly. So 100% of the donations that I've received have gone, to our mission,
Yeah.
to our teams, to the families that we've been helping, and that's been one of the biggest issues. Is how do you do this, and how do you pay for it? So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of people that can help, but um, we can't just do it for free.
Yeah.
You have to have
Expensive.
lodging, you have to have travel, you have to have supplies. I mean, all that stuff exists, and unfortunately, I mean, and I hate doing it, but we have to ask for donations and stuff.
Hmm.
So that's part of it. And for people that don't have backgrounds such as mine or the people that I work with, like it's all right to make those monetary contributions. Um, there's also organizations that pay for people to come over and work with them. I mean, there's a lot of organizations in Poland that I met people that would come over for a few weeks and work at like a soup kitchen or whatever. You know, you can donate old coats and blankets and stuff like that. Um, there's a lot that people can do without actually having to go there.
Well, thanks for all of that. That information, and I'm happy to help you with your social media. That's something I can help with. But you know, from a political, the United States standpoint, do you think what should we be doing? What have we done right, and what have we gotten wrong with aid to Ukraine?
I mean, obviously, politics isn't my thing. I'm not an expert in any of that.
Yep.
There's a lot of strategic um, issues that the people that are making those decisions have to deal with and think about. Um, what I will say is that I think it's very much worth our while to continue to support the Ukrainian people, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because um, their threat is our threat. Um, if we allow Russia to go in and do this and sit back, it's going to put us in an even worse position. Um, I don't think Russia anticipated the Ukrainians being able to stand up and defend their country the way that they have. And I think
Mhm.
they went in there thinking that this would be over in a week or so.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. I also don't think that Russia thought that the world would come together the way it has to support Ukraine. Yep. I mean, and NATO has gained 2 more allies, so I forgot what we were talking about.
Just what you think the U.S. has gotten right with aid and
yeah, I mean, it's a process, and that's the frustrating thing is that there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape. It takes time. There's concerns about what weapons we give them, when we give them. I mean, so it would be nice to see it come faster.
Yeah.
Because the need is immediate. I've heard people say, "Oh, well, it's a corrupt country and people are selling it on the black market and all that stuff." And is there a possibility that stuff's going on? Yeah, maybe so, but it's very few and far between. Because they can't afford to lose that stuff. That stuff has to be used. Maybe somebody's making obviously somebody's making a profit on it, but they wholeheartedly need that equipment, that ammunition. It's not just going there to sit around, like it's being used.
Yeah.
So for one, I think it's a great thing that we're opening up the Patriot systems and pushing those in there because, as of, the past few months, drone attacks and missiles and that such stuff is what Russia has been using to attack deep within Ukraine. So, yeah, I think we should fully support them and continue that support. And open it up and make it faster for them to get this equipment.
Sure. Is there anything you want Americans to understand or know that you think maybe they're missing the picture? Or, in closing, is there anything you would say to someone listening, like, look, I've been there, this is what I want you to understand and have compassion for?
Yeah, one of the frustrating things about coming back was, for one, it's not in the media as much as it was when it first happened. People are dying every day, every minute. And they're not, these are people that weren't even soldiers before February. Their country was invaded, so they joined the army, or they were required to join the army. A lot of the media attention that I've seen has been politicized. One side of the aisle pointing the finger at the other side of the aisle. Or,
yep.
People saying that there's corruption, there's this, money laundering, and all this other stuff. I think one of the worst things about our country is how political it's gotten. At the end of the day, innocent people are dying, and another country, a much larger country, the much larger army, invaded this country and committed atrocities, and they're continuing to commit atrocities. And it's important that we, as Americans who stand for freedom, support and defend a country that's fighting for their independence and fighting for their freedom, or not fighting for their independence, but fighting for their freedom.
Right.
And fighting for their land. If somebody was to come into America and invade and take over, one of our states, I'm pretty sure that we as Americans would want to fight back and take our territory back because that's ours.
Right.
And I think it's important to not get lost into the politics, and to keep the true meaning of what we're doing there and what's going on there and defend it. It's freedom.
And I think, the point that we keep coming back to, Steve and everyone at the North Group is if you let this happen, right, when does it stop? Where does Russia go next? Right. So that's why it's everybody's problem, right?
Exactly.
Is where does it stop?
Yeah, I mean, if we allow Russia to continue what they're doing, what country's next? And you can definitely feel that in the neighboring countries to Ukraine. I mean, you've got Poland that's
Yep.
tripled the size of their military since all this started. All the NATO countries over there stand ready because they could be next.
Right.
We're very fortunate as Americans to be far removed from the battlefields. But to be in Europe and be right next door, like that's not that far. That's like driving across the country, or not even driving across the country, but driving a few states over. I mean,
yeah, it's close.
It's very real for them.
Right.
And also on top of that, the burden of the refugees and stuff that are coming out of Ukraine is a lot heavier on the Europeans because it's right there.
It's a lot of resources that now have to be provided for a lot more people.
So I mean, it's a problem not just for Ukraine, but it's a problem for everybody. And we have to support them, and we have to do what's right.
Old St. Mike.
I don't know about all that.
I wish you all the best in this next trip. We will certainly pray for you. And, just one more question. I hope that picture of Jesus is going back on your shoulder.
Most definitely will be. I think I'll be hearing that for the rest of my life.
I love to hear that. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Again, just God be with you and everyone over there. So thanks to all of you for listening. You can catch more of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, or you can watch them on our website at tngdefense.com. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mike. We'll see you soon.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.